Welcome, everybody, to Women on Wisdom. I'm your host, Sandra Boyd. What if the real challenge in today's workplace isn't change itself, but the uncertainty that comes with it? We have unclear expectations, direction, shifting plans, and endless disruption, which drains our energy, raises anxiety, and strains both team and leaders. Today's guest, one of my favorite, is Dr. Dayna Lee-Baggley. She's a registered psychologist and international expert in human behavior. With over 2 decades of experience and expertise, she's an authority on burnout, psychological safety, workplace wellness, behavior change, and leadership. She's also the author of Healthy Habits Suck. We're going to unpack the difference between change and uncertainty and why leaders need different strategies for each. We're going to discuss the effects of layoffs, AI, economic strain, constant disruption, and we'll examine women's experiences in leadership. Look at what the double bind is: emotional labor, pressure to have all the answers, and burnout at work and at home. Dr. Dayna offers practical research-based advice on psychological flexibility, protecting your batteries, your boundaries, building psychological safety, and being approachable without losing yourself. Work is changing. Leaders who honor people's humanity will build healthier, more resilient, and more effective organizations. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Dayna. I'm so happy to have you back and to talk about a subject that kind of came up in one of our conversations, and that's the difference between change and uncertainty. And it's certainly something that's impacting businesses around the world. Organizations are, we were going through all this change. How do we support our employees? You and I had a conversation just recently, and you said, we really have to stop talking that change is the only focus. We have to talk about the difference between change and uncertainty. So I'd love you to explain that to our audience.
Yes, thanks so much for having me. So, there is a difference between change and uncertainty because when there's change, there's a destination in mind. Somebody has some kind of plan. People might not know all of the plans, but somebody's got some plan in terms of what the change is supposed to look like, what the outcome is supposed to be, what the destination is supposed to be. But in uncertainty, we don't have that. We don't have the ability to know where we're going. We don't have the ability to know when we need to pivot or how many times we need to pivot. And so that uncertainty is a lot more difficult to deal with than just change. It includes change, but it adds this extra element, which can really activate our threat systems in our survival brains because that extra uncertainty can really raise people's anxieties. There's already a lot of extra battery demands when we're doing change because you have to learn new behaviors and do new things. But when you add on uncertainty on top of that, you get some extra elements of threat and anxiety that make it even harder for people to perform.
So do you want to give me an example of what you're seeing in the corporate world where we can kind of, make a distinction between change and uncertainty?
Yeah, a classic example happening, unfortunately, in a lot of places right now is layoffs. But again, sometimes the layoffs, they're not sure exactly how much or exactly who or when it's going to happen. And so that uncertainty, again, about how much is going to get cut, who's going to get cut, where's the cut are going to happen, right? That's an extra layer of uncertainty, not just kind of changing things. And then the people that remain afterwards are also left with a lot of uncertainty because they often are now in new roles, they're in new positions, they have to do new things. There's positions and people who have been lost. And all of that, again, generates quite a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. Those changes in uncertainty are more unpredictable. And so they're more unpredictable about when you need to pivot, when you need to change things. And that uncertainty adds that extra element of, tension and anxiety and threat for people.
Yeah, and great example with the people that are left behind. When I was in career transition, we used to always say they would end up with survivor syndrome, and they'd be going through all of these different feelings. First of all, they don't know what's down the road, what's going to happen. Are they going to be next? Also, they feel guilty that they weren't chosen to exit the organization. So there's all of these feelings that are bubbling up: fear, relief, anxiety, guilt, all the things that, an individual can go through. And it can be happening in a very short period of time. So emotions are up and down. So when I think about what you've just said, is it really reflects a lot of the conversations that I'm having with organizations right now. One in particular that I can think of where my clients said, we're going through change and we're going to have new systems in place where business is shifting, AI is coming in. But what the problem is that it's this constant, continuous change that people are going through, that we have to also understand with that change is you don't actually know what the end result was going to be. Where I think back in the corporate world, we implement this system and this, and this is going to happen. So you have to sort of get along on the change curve, where even if we implement a new system, we may not know what the outcome is going to be. We don't know the outcome of the economy and what world, what's happening in the world is going to impact our business, whether it be tariffs or just simply AI. Is that, part of a story that organizations need to tell their employees? Change is here to stay. We have to get used to it. And, here's how we're going to do it. And the uncertainty is a bubble that we have no idea what's inside.
Yeah, again, there's different leadership challenges in uncertainty versus just change. AI implementation is a great example of it. It's not like we're just learning a new software, for example, right? Again, if you're just learning a new software, there's a plan. People have, training sessions. They've got experts. But with AI, we're not exactly sure what AI is going to be, how it's going to work, how we implement it into systems, how that impacts people. And sometimes people's jobs are under threat because AI could take over their job. So that's a different thing. The issue for leaders is you don't always have things to be able to say, because you may also not know what's coming next or when the next pivot is or when the next change is. And so it can leave a lot of vagueness and in that uncertainty. And when there's not enough information, people will fill it in. And they will usually fill it in with the worst case scenario, not the best case scenario, just kind of
Yeah.
how human brains work, right? And so when there is a lack of information, people often come up with the worst case scenarios. And so that's a challenge for leaders, which is, what do you do when you actually don't know what's coming next, right? Again, if there's a plan, a change plan, you can say, well, here's the ultimate destination. There are some bumps along the way, but here's what we're trying to do and why, versus it's just uncertain and we're not sure what's coming next or when it's coming or how many pivots we need to take. And so it's a different leadership challenge for people dealing in uncertainty.
Now, we know that on this show, we always, we try or we do focus on the impact on women and what's happening in the world and how that impacts women. So, and we do realize what's going on is, both men and women are impacted with this uncertainty and with the change. But can you help me understand some of the unique factors when it comes to how women are navigating this new world that we're in?
So there's some general issues that always surface for women leaders compared to men leaders, male leaders. And so those happen, those are also happening in addition to things that people need to manage around change and uncertainty. So for example, there's a thing we call the double bind, which is that the same behavior from a woman is interpreted differently than from a male. And there's a classic cartoon you might be able to show that shows.
We're gonna show that
Right.
during the podcast. We'll make sure that we show it.
Yeah. And so the cartoon shows a dad coming home with pizza, and he's the fun dad. And then it shows a mom coming home with pizza, and she's the lazy mom. And so it demonstrates how the exact same behavior is interpreted differently when men do it compared to women when women do it. And that's a similar thing that happens for women in leadership. So for the classic one is that when women are more assertive or aggressive or forceful, they're actually seen as more difficult compared to a man who is acknowledged as being like a go-getter and a fighter and aggressive, and that's a positive attribute for him. It's a negative attribute for her. And so the exact same behavior can result in much different outcomes for women compared to men. So that's true at all times. That exists always for women in leadership positions. During change and uncertainty, there are some additional things that can happen for women. We know in general, women employees as well as women leaders are more burnt out and more exhausted than their male counterparts. So if you just look at the statistics across the board, and often because women have more duties. They have more duties at home, so they're doing more caregiving, they're doing more housework, for example. As well as more duties in the workplace. So, for example, they're often more responsible for emotional labor in the workplace. Now, there's different ways you can approach that if you're a woman leader. There's a classic study showing that women apologize in the workplace more often than men. And so this narrative shows up that says, oh, we should teach women they don't need to apologize so much. But maybe women are apologizing the exact right amount and men are not apologizing enough. And so when we
Okay, I
talk
gotta
about things,
stop you there because I think this is worth you saying that again. And I know you said it on the show before, but honestly, it's probably one of the best quotes I have heard in regards to women and our obsessive need to apologize for everything. So, can you just say that one more time?
right, maybe women are apologizing the exact right amount and men are not apologizing enough. And so it's the frame of reference problem, which is what are we considering normal? And I think we can look at that when we consider emotional labor in the workplace also. There's going to be more emotional labor in general when there's uncertainty because people's survival brains are going to get activated. The emotional part is going to get activated. And so there's more emotions to have to manage. Women in general and women leaders tend to be more responsible for emotional labor than their male counterparts. However, again, we could make the argument that men are not doing enough emotional labor, that we have not properly trained them to deal with emotions that show up in the workplace. And it's one thing, again, if you're building cars on a factory floor, that's a different thing than most of how, workplaces show up now, where people come with their full selves. And I talked to lots of leaders who are like, can't they just leave that at home? I get it. I get it. I wish they would leave it at home too. Wouldn't that make everyone's life easier? But they don't. And especially younger generations, they bring their
Yes.
whole self to work. And so women potentially have an advantage because they have gained skills in emotional labor, because we do more emotional labor across all of our relationships.
Can you
But
give
that
us
gives
an
us the
example?
potential. Yeah, it gives us the potential to actually have more effective teams because we're dealing with the emotional labor. So, examples of emotional labor would be things like people being upset or there's conflict, between team members, or somebody feels slighted or left out by somebody else, or somebody's mother dies and they burst into tears in the workplace, right? All of those things are anything related to like managing emotions that show up, which again, people tend to bring into the workplace. And so instead of seeing that as like a extra burden that women have, which it is more work for women. It's also the potential opportunity of having more effective teams because we are dealing with the emotional labor. When leaders don't deal with the emotional labor, it just turns, instead of being kind of embers, it turns into a house on fire. And then you have a lot of expensive turnover, right? Changing positions, absenteeism, presenteeism, disability costs when those things are not well managed in the workplace. It's a huge cost that organizations really don't appreciate all the time about the cost of turnover, right? The cost of trying to find new people, of training them, of getting them up to speed. That's a big cost. And so if you are losing people, and you tend to lose your most effective people, right? The people who have
Yeah.
lots of options to go elsewhere are the people who leave. And so you tend to lose your best people when there is high turnover, not your least performing people, right? You lose your best performing people, and it's a huge cost. And so when leaders have those abilities to be able to manage, we call them soft skills, right? But it's actually people skills. And unfortunately, people show up as people now in workplaces. They don't
Yeah.
show up as robots or other things that are just super compliant and do exactly as they're told. And so there's an opportunity for women to have more effective teams because they have the skill sets to manage that emotional labor more effectively.
So our emotional intelligence is actually
Yes,
coming into play because
exactly.
I remember growing up in the workplace that God forbid that you should show your emotions even.
Yes.
Yeah, my biggest fear, my absolute biggest fear was that I would be in a meeting and I would get emotional and I would actually cry. And so now the research shows that it can actually bring moments of connection with people if you're being honest with your emotions and what's going on. What do you think about that? Because, women my age have been told to bottle those emotions up. You can't, as you mentioned right at the beginning, and leadership, you were judged on your, oh, well, she must be PMSing today. Look at the resting bitch face. Like all of these stereotypes that men have never had to deal with. So if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and absolutely that's exactly how it used to be framed, which is you can't ever show your emotions in the workplace, that leaders should be a rock, they should be, stable and dependable, don't ever like let on, you don't know what's happening. But the research does not support that as an effective form of leadership, right? And especially in times of change and uncertainty, that kind of leadership falls really flat because people are stressed out. And if the leader doesn't acknowledge that, then the employees go, well, I guess I'm on my own, or I guess there's something wrong with me. Everyone else is fine. It's just me. And then they don't cope as well. There's a lot of research demonstrating that when you can harness that social support, social connection in the workplace, people are more effective. They perform better. They like their jobs better. They have less turnover, less absenteeism, less presenteeism. And that kind of leadership requires us to acknowledge emotions, and I like to remind leaders that, the expression we use is be just messy enough to be approachable. So, no, you don't want to have a big tantrum or like, a puddle on the floor, but you want to be human who has some emotions, who acknowledges the reality of what everyone else is experiencing. Because otherwise, people just cope on their own and they cope much less effectively when they have to cope on their own. And so that style of leadership that, again, women often are better trained in because our culture forces us into emotional labor roles all the time, right, has the potential to actually help people cope better during times of change and uncertainty.
It's really fascinating how we're starting to shift, but I'm still hearing of someone who works with a lot of executives. I had an executive, a female executive, who's probably, my age and stage and has been through the ups and downs, but still has this feeling that babysitting and childcare and all that should be kept out of the workplace, and we should not, women just need to get a handle on this. And also this person mentioned that they were really surprised at how many young men were also saying, well, my wife can't do the pickup. Are you seeing yourself any shifts in this thinking, or are we still battling some of the basics?
I think there's a parallel also when we talk about mental health in the workplace, right? Because
Mm.
younger generations are much more open around discussing mental health issues in the workplace. And so you can see that that is a similar thing to talking about your childcare issues, to talking about, your caregiving issues and those kinds of things. That again, people bring their full self to work now. And so if you don't help them figure out their childcare, they're not present and they're not engaged in their work. They might show up, but they're not doing effective work. And so it's, I think honestly naive for leaders to think that people can just show up and do their jobs. That's not how people function. And the culture, especially in younger generations, has totally shifted that that's a terrible thing to do, that you absolutely should not be forced to not be yourself. when you come to work, and they are very certain about this. And they don't mind if you fire them. They don't mind if you demote them
Yes.
or you never promote them. They're fine with that because it actually matters more to them for their mental health to be protected and their authenticity to be protected. They're quite willing to go find another job somewhere else if you're not going to do that for them. And so workplaces, Gen Z will, soon be the biggest part of the labor force. And if workplaces don't figure this out and don't figure out a new way of interacting with them and motivating them, they're going to suffer. You can't keep using the old way of doing things, which again, the older generations will sort of tolerate and accept as like how you need to do it. And I like to remind people that, younger generations kind of have this stereotype, that they are always asking for mental health days. And sometimes they need to learn the skill to actually push through and to tolerate distress, to push through and to be uncomfortable. I think sometimes younger generations have misinterpreted mental health as about feeling good. That's not what mental health is about. Mental health is about doing meaningful things, which sometimes requires a whole bunch of distress, a whole bunch of discomfort to do meaningful things. So, mental health is not just about feeling good, and discomfort doesn't mean you have bad mental health or you're being harmed. So, sometimes younger generations need to push through that discomfort. Older generations should really take more mental health days. They're not taking enough days, right? There's like, suck it up, buttercup really does not actually pay off in the long run, right? And so they actually should be learning to take more mental health days. But both generations have some skills that they could learn from each other to make them both more effective.
This is a balance. And so, what is it that they can be teaching in the workplace that supports an understanding of the difference between your mental health? Because everybody thinks mental health means that, and I hear this a lot. I have, young adults in my life, and it's, I want to be happy, I want to be happy, but we know that life isn't always about happy. So the workplace, I think, is just so muddled and mixed messages, where we say, oh yes, we're embracing helping people with mental health, and we give them these days, mental health days, but at the same time, there's judgment around how many you take, or not another mental health day is that person taking. And you should suck it up, buttercup, because the people that are leading are the people that grew up in an error. It's almost, I have to say this, and I said this to a client not too long ago. We raised them. They are showing up how we raised them to show up, and now we're pissed off at everybody else's child. But we collectively have, because we were fed up with the workplace. So how are we helping organizations? And again, I want to think about women because they carry an extra load. Like, what do organizations need to do to make some of these shifts? And it's not the old-fashioned change management courses.
Right. So I think the term that we use that comes from the research literature that I think helps captures this is psychological flexibility, which means
Okay.
that that you can do both. If you need to push through, you can push through, and if you need to rest, you can rest. And so whichever part you're not good at is the one that then you need to work on. So if you're really good at resting and taking your mental health days, then you need practice pushing through discomfort. If you're really good at sucking it up, buttercup, and not taking enough rest days, then you need to practice taking rest days. And so we're looking to fill the skill set that you're least good at so that you can do both. We'll always have kind of tendencies on which ones we do more easily, but we need to have a larger repertoire of behavior, different options that we can choose to be effective. And so if you take that lens to it, then we can see that some in workplaces, for some of the younger generations, we're helping them move through discomfort. For some people in the older generations, we're helping them take more breaks. We're helping them take more time off and to not get burnt out. And so you can use that same framework to explain both people's behaviors that they need to work on. And I think, again, it's helpful to frame mental health not as feeling good. Mental health is about doing meaningful things, and it often requires discomfort. And so, that you need different kind of carrots and sticks to manage younger generations. They're not interested in more money if at the expense of their mental health. They're not interested in
No.
promotions at the expense of their well-being. They're not threatened by being fired. They're totally willing to be contract gig workers because they're pretty certain they're going to be anyway. They never had the expectation that they were going to, spend an entire lifetime with one company. And so those same carrots and sticks that works with older generations does not work with younger generations. For younger generations, it's very much about meaning, values, authenticity. We have to tap into that part of it. And there's very much, part of the evidence-based programs that we use is about helping people do meaningful things, which means tolerating discomfort. It's part of the package, two sides of the same coin. If you want to do meaningful things in life, it requires experiencing discomfort. And so we can help people sort of change that perception that mental health means I should always feel good. And we can help them slowly increase that distress tolerance as they try harder things. You really need that, again, psychological safety where it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to not be okay, right? These are all these, again, emotional labor, emotional intelligence, right? Soft skills that are really essential for managing people in the workplace now. And so those are, and then again, older generations, we need to encourage them to take more time off, right? We need to encourage them not to get to when they're absolutely in distress and have no choice but to stop working, and to help them take more time off earlier in that process.
Uh, I think we really have to start looking at things differently. The old school change management, we really start to break these things down, the difference between change management, uncertainty. We need to talk about resilience. I just had a female leader who came to me. She said, you know what, I keep being asked by everybody to teach resilience and be resilient. However, we're just tired. I'm sick of being resilient. I'm feeling tired and I'm worn out. And in this particular, she had, teenage kids, aging parents, the usual story that we hear. And she's carrying more of the workload in her family around, that emotional workload. Are you seeing this on a regular basis? And do you feel that we need to have a better look at what's happening in the organization and start reframing what we mean by change management versus resilience versus uncertainty?
Yeah, absolutely. So we never want to use resiliency as an excuse for having a bad workplace, right? I
Um,
like the analogy of the canaries in the coal mine are there to alert the miners that there's a toxic, environment. But we never said that the canaries just needed to be more resilient. Right. And so if it's a toxic workplace, it's a toxic workplace, and no amount of resiliency is going to protect you from that. And
yeah.
so that also means organizations have a huge opportunity to make their workforces more effective by investing in wellness and mental health and those kinds of things. I think that a place where they often go wrong is that they think about it in terms of employee assistance programs. So, like, once there's a crisis, then you can go talk to somebody. But the data very clearly demonstrates that preventative methods, meaning the day-to-day things that impact wellness, have a much bigger impact and are a much bigger bang for your buck than waiting for the crisis to emerge. And that's a lot about leadership skills, is how leaders interact with their employees on a day-to-day basis. And there's lots of skill sets that we can teach people to use that are what we would consider like Psych 101, basic psychology skills, that you are absolutely not a therapist, absolutely not in that kind of role, but using our understanding and our science understanding of human behavior and human nature and how we make sense of that and how we help people manage that. That actually also makes the leaders feel better, because I feel like there's a lot of leaders that get to their positions because they were the best widget maker. And now
Yeah.
in the leadership position, it has nothing to do with the widgets and it's all about the people. And they are often faced with really huge demands. People bring their mental health issues into the workplace, they bring their childcare issues, they bring all of these things into the workplace, and leaders are often not trained in any of those things. And so it is an opportunity for workplaces to have a really big impact, not just on the well-being of their employees, but on their bottom line, on their productivity, on their, engagement, on how well they're doing as an organization. But I think it means, not thinking about soft skills as like this second thing that you do or this other thing, or like if you have to do
Yeah.
it, right?
Okay,
It's like,
I got to suck it up and listen to this person.
right, exactly. That this is actually the main skill set now that is needed. And again, it's only going to get like the demands on leaders only get bigger when there is change and uncertainty, right? When there is uncertainty, the emotional needs of the employees go up because their threat systems are activated, their emotions are activated. And so they need even more support in managing that in order to focus and be able to get their work done. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities for organizations to focus on those leadership skills, like on the day to day interactions, and not just declare we have an EAP and that's our mental health strategy.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. The other thing that I noticed that a lot of women do is they feel like they have to have all the answers. And that's part of learning, even with our children, not just, in the workplace. We feel like we have to have the answer for everything. And so I I always say to people, you don't have to have all the answers. Listen, ask people, what is it that you want to do? What's the outcome look like? How can I support you during this time? You don't have to run around and fix everything. So I'm just wondering from your point of view, what are some of the things that some of the boundaries that women need to put in place?
It's a mistake that many leaders make, that they're supposed to come up with the answers and come up with the fix. And often there isn't a fix to the problem, and you'd be much more effective, again, helping the person feel heard and understood to activate that part of their brain that then helps them feel better because they feel heard and understood, than to problem solve and come up with the answer. I was doing a talk for senior women in academia, so deans and presidents of universities. And I made the statement that sometimes it's not about, having more of yourself together, having a get better at your to-do list, that actually was about falling apart more effectively. And this became a big controversy in the room about whether we should be falling apart more effectively. And so, what I meant by that is that we need to often convey that we need support from other people in an effective way so that they stand up and help us, right? They step up to what's needed. When we do that, when we're trying to solve all the problems and make everything happen ourselves, it's a very common thing that women do. It's a very culturally conveyed things that we are supposed to do, that it is somehow our job to make sure everything keeps working. But it's again a recipe for burnout. And we see that in the stats that women at all levels are more burnt out than their male counterparts. And so we need to learn how to recruit help to make sure that we're not the only ones doing that, whether that's in your home environment or your workplace environment. And again, we're not talking about being a puddle, hot
Yeah.
mess on the floor. We're talking about be just messy enough to be approachable, but to have that human element so that it's not all on your shoulders. Now, this strategy also comes about because women historically had to be better to get the same
Yeah.
opportunities. They had to perform better to get the same, result or viewed in the same way as men did. And so they had to overcompensate quite a lot in order to do that. And that still exists in all kinds of places in the workplace. So not all places are safe to fall apart effectively, right? But you
No.
want to have somewhere in your life where you can fall apart effectively, where you don't have to be on, have it all together all the time. Because again, in our psychological flexibility model, that's too rigid at some point. Any behavior we do too much or rigidly or all the time is going to become problematic at some point.
Oh, that is such a good point. And I love the idea of, understanding that it's okay to fall apart. And, even if you don't feel safe in the work environment, you have to find the safe places where you can fall apart and being just human enough to be approachable and messy enough. That is
And I often
perfect.
remind, these women that get very distressed at the idea of falling apart. I'm like, you're not going to be a hot mess, okay? When your version of falling apart is going to actually be still be very put together relative to how what it looks like for people to fall apart. So at best, you're going to be a lukewarm mess. And so, and then your old system will click right back in and you'll get back to having it all together. So it's people sometimes have this fear that if I let go, it's going to collapse and I'll never be able to put myself back together again. That's not what happens. Your old like habits click in pretty quick and you get back to putting it all together very easily, right? But it's a skill set that people need to learn to do. Just like it would be a skill set if you are always falling apart, you need to figure out how to keep it together.
I hope you're really enjoying this episode of Women on Wisdom. We are sponsored by TalentWise Collective. And my question for you today is, what's your organization doing to drive the equitable change we desperately need? TalentWise Collective supports organizations to empower their employees with services and programs such as coaching and transformative workshops and my interactive talk, Bridging the Gap, which is designed for immediate and impactful action. Reach out to Connect TWC at talentwisecollective.com. That's Connect TWC at talentwisecollective.com. Let's build a truly equitable future together. So I guess the question for me remains, what is acceptable falling apart in the workplace for a woman, given all of the different, the different labels, not just from men, but from other females? What does that look like? And how do you explain that?
I think it's important for all leaders, right, to explain that sometimes they struggle with things, right? Sometimes their teenagers are driving them nuts. Sometimes they didn't do, they had, sometimes I have ice cream for dinner because I can't get my act together to have a real dinner, right? Those kinds of things. Again, there's, a picture I posted on social media, which is me with my hair curlers in, because
I saw that. That was great. That was
because
funny.
what happens is that sometimes I don't have my act together and I go to my internal team meeting with my hair still in rollers because I didn't have enough time to do it ahead of time. My team loves it. They are always thrilled somehow when I show up with hair rollers in my hair because to them it signals, oh, she's a real human. She's not perfect all the time. She like struggles with things too. She struggles with time management too. And so it makes them feel better. And it's this like human thing, right? I know you've had the experience where someone looked perfect to you and then you find out that they actually struggle with something. And you're like, oh, thank God. Thank God you're not perfect, right? We've all said that to people. It's the same thing for leaders. You do not want to have a perfect leader who has it together all the time and never struggles with things. And so, we have a whole training on how to charge your battery and how to protect your battery. And part of that is acknowledging when, sometimes you didn't get it right, when you skipped your recharging activity, when you're struggling to find time to do it. It's actually not helpful to have a leader who has it all figured out and never struggles with anything, because that's not how the employee feels. The employee feels like I'm constantly struggling with things. And so this person can't ever get me. And this person can't ever have my back because they're too perfect. They don't know what I'm really going through. And again, we miss out on this aspect of humans that when they feel connected, supported, understood by other trusting humans, they perform better. They function better. It's just like this switch that happens in humans that when you don't feel alone, we function better. And it's actually so important in change and uncertainty, especially uncertainty, because there's so many things we can't fix as leaders. There's so many problems. Like, go ahead and try and fix tariffs, right? Like,
Yeah.
have any ability to impact these things, and yet they often have a big impact on companies. If you can't fix the problem, then leaders feel like, well, there's nothing I can do. But actually, you can activate this part of the human brain, which is called the social engagement system, which allows people to feel better because they feel connected. They are not alone. They're not alone in the struggle. And it's this sense that somebody gets me and somebody's got my back. And when that part of our brain is activated, people function better, even though we haven't changed anything. It changes people's perceptions of themselves and the world, that they can handle things. And so it's especially important to be able to activate that in uncertainty when there's so many things that we can't change and we can't fix.
What you just said, I think, is just fundamentally important. And it's hard for organizations to really take a different look at themselves. The idea of community and sharing, for me, I know that I grew up where you did not share. There was an old saying, it's an old Irish saying, it's certainly what I grew up with, it's called keep yourself to yourself, which means you never talk about your issues or your problems. And I remember in 2015 when my dad was going through, he had dementia, and I didn't want people to know at work that I was doing the elder care because I saw the result and how people were judged, how other women were judged. That I remember being in a meeting one time where my dad had literally gone missing, and I saw on my phone texts and phone calls, and I'm in a meeting with my, with the leadership team, and I didn't tell them. I said, I have a client call that I need to take. Not that my dad has gone missing, because I thought if they thought that all these things were going wrong in my life, that they would judge me and I wouldn't get promoted or I wouldn't get opportunities because they thought I was spending more time in my home life than I was in my work life. And I know what I finally did reveal in a letter that I wrote, not a letter, but a blog that I wrote. So many people came to me to share their experience, both men and women, particularly women, and even my corporate clients. And I just felt this community around me of support, and that I didn't have to be outwardly perfect all the time. Nothing going on here. I got a perfect life. I'm able to manage everything. I can cook things and clean, and I can take care of my parents and my kids and have a perfect marriage and a perfect work life and all the rest of it, which was bullshit. And now I just feel so, it feels so good to be able to say, hey, I'm having a good week. I got this going on and that going on. So I love
You
the
know,
way you framed it.
we call that having an elevator pitch, which is about how things are going in your life, which is that you don't have to share all the details about everything that's going on. But
Hmm.
sometimes it's really useful to say, I have a family member who's sick, or I'm going through a divorce, or my kids are having some trouble in school, right? That's an elevator pitch. It's just short, sweet, right? But it gives people an indicator that something's happening. And that helps them make sense of your behavior so that if you're late or you're distracted, right? Rather than thinking, oh, why is she uninterested in what I'm saying? She might be like, oh, right, she's getting divorced. That's probably on her mind. And so it helps people interpret behavior better. The other thing, too, is that if you happen to work with people who are perfect, who have no problems in their lives, and everything goes swimmingly 100% of the time, and your clients are also the same, then definitely pretend to be perfect, because that will be good. But if you happen to work with humans, who tend to be messy, who tend to have problematic lives and things that don't go well, then you're much better off to be a human along with them. And so, your example you just gave of when you finally revealed it, people being like, oh, that's so helpful. I'm going through the same thing, or I know what that's like. That's exactly what happens for people. That's the being just messy enough to be approachable. That's the like having an elevator pitch of like, I have a sick family member because they're also struggling. Everyone's struggling, right? And again, in uncertainty, everyone is struggling. And so it's a lot more helpful to work with people who also struggle, who also get it, who also don't need you to be perfect, right? Than to pretend that everybody's doing fine and therefore you're going to pretend you're doing fine too.
It's interesting, just when I did that blog as well, I had one vice president at a financial organization, a really big one, reveal to me that she went through a divorce over a year and did not tell the CEO for fear of being judged, and even went as far as bringing her ex-husband to an event. So it took her a full year because she had seen other women, particularly other women who'd gone through a divorce, lose opportunities, or if they showed up in a meeting and they were, emotional or whatever, it was blamed on their inability to manage her emotional state because of what she was going through. So I remember being even shocked by that someone
Yep.
would hide it to the extent to
And
bring an
again,
ex-husband to an event.
right. Lots of people used to hide these things, right? And again, the older generation is like, can't you just pretend you're not a human and come to work? But again, people increasingly have less tolerance for that, less desire to do that. Younger generations are just like, no thanks. Like they just think it's like the most horrible thing in the world to
I
show up
know.
inauthentically. And
I
so the
love it.
idea that they should hide themselves coming to work is like completely perplexing to them, right? And so we do need to adjust, and there's an opportunity to actually take advantage of how humans function to make use of that to help people function better and more effectively. And it's again, be just messy enough to be approachable, right? Have your elevator pitch about things, repeat it to people because they will forget, right? They'll forget that something is happening in your life. But it helps people function better. And organizations that don't adapt to that are quickly going to find that they don't have enough employees because the younger generations just don't tolerate that. They just will not work for somebody who doesn't accept them as a real human. And so you will run out of people. You can hold on to your older generations for as long as, and they'll probably, last longer than they did before because we all live longer. But eventually you're going to run out of people and your company is going to fall apart because it's not keeping up with the times. And it's just one of those things that we need to keep up with now, that people show up as real humans, and this psychological safety, this ability to have the soft skills in leadership, right? And women have the potential to have an opportunity here because they have more, they're trained to have more emotion management, emotional intelligence, emotional labor skills across their lifetime to be able to do this better.
It can be simple as I'm experiencing, some family issues right now. So I'm sorry if I haven't seen myself
Yeah.
and may not be as present as I normally am.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be revealing.
Elevator
You can
pitch,
still
right?
keep yourself to yourself. You
Correct.
just you
Exactly.
just have to
Elevator pitch.
elevator pitch. Okay, I have learned so much. I can fall apart. I can reveal. I can share, and without oversharing. And I don't. I can fall apart without becoming a hot mess. So tell me about some of the research based tactics that women can use to protect their time and their energy and show up in the workplace authentically and create human connection. So tell me a little bit about some of the things that they can do.
Like, and one of the things that we want to think about is protecting your battery, right? That we often in our culture act like if you just try harder, you can do more things. But that's not how it works. There's a fixed battery of energy that we have available to us. It gets eaten up by things like uncertainty. It gets eaten up by family stress, right? All those financial stress, things like that are going to eat up that battery. And so we want to be particularly mindful about how you're using your battery. And this is where, setting boundaries, things like that are really important because it's about protecting your battery for the things that are most important, the things that only you can do versus things that anybody could do. That's why it's helpful sometimes, again, to fall apart more effectively because you can recruit extra batteries to help do things, right? Somehow in my home life, if I just ask politely everyone to help contribute, nothing happens. But if I burst into tears or I start yelling at them, then they get it. They get it that this is a real thing, that I am stressed out and I need your help, right? If I say that all calmly and serenely, it doesn't land anywhere and they don't feel motivated to help me. But if I have some emotion in there, which is genuine emotion, I'm not manipulating, I'm genuinely upset by it, then they step up. They get it that it's a real thing that needs help. And they're adding extra batteries to the system, right? So that you can, again, protect your battery for the thing that matters most. When women set boundaries in particular, one, you want to focus on what you control. And so people often set boundaries around what the other person should do or not do, meaning
Mm.
like you shouldn't ask me to do these things, or you should know to like take out the garbage, right? Those kinds of things. But you're going to be much more effective if you focus on your own behavior. And so, that might mean not answering the phone, right? That might mean not answering the emails because that's under your control versus what the other person needs to do. And so you'll be much more effective at maintaining boundaries if you're focused on your own behavior compared to somebody else, right? And the other thing to keep in mind is that it requires discomfort because you are going to let somebody down. right? You're not going to do, there are some things you should only do at 70%, even if you could do them at 110%, right? That's battery management around this thing really isn't that essential. I need to get it done, but it doesn't need to be done at 110%. I should just do it at 70, right? Who are you? You're going to let somebody down. You're going to say no to somebody. You're not going to show up for someone. You're not going to get it done, even though you probably could get it done, right?
Yeah.
That's the trick. And so we will experience discomfort when you set a boundary because you are going to have to let somebody down. And the expression that we talk about is disappoint them now or disappoint them later, right? You disappoint them now by saying, hey, I'm not going to be able to do that thing for you. You're going to have to come up with another plan. Or you disappoint them later because you burn yourself out so much that then you can't show up for the thing and you have to call in sick. And now it's a crisis because they have to deal with it at the last minute. So disappoint them now or disappoint them later, but we have to accept that there is some discomfort in setting boundaries. People think, well, as soon as I don't feel guilty or as soon as I don't feel bad, then I'll set the boundary. Then I'll know it's okay. No, you're definitely going to feel discomfort when you set a boundary. That's part of it. And that's the skill set that actually you need to have to be able to set boundaries effectively.
Wow. I think this is really important. This disappoint now or disappoint later, because what happens is that when we're in crises, we can't function. And it's actually even worse knowing that we've left all of this stuff floating up in the air. We have no control. And that can even impact us even more. And it can spiral downward. So what is a what is what can you do? Should you be sitting down ahead of time to say, what am I going to accept? What am I not going to accept? What are my boundaries, both in the workplace and at home? Because women are usually thinking of both and managing both. And even with their, outside their immediate family, their friendships, because we're trying to be all things to all people. And that hasn't gone away just because the younger generation has better boundaries and we've raised them. But still there's the residual, there's women handing this down to the younger generation. Help us think of what we could do ahead of time.
This is part of our battery management, which is being mindful of your battery and thinking about it as a fixed amount rather than something that you can just keep expanding, right? And so you want to think about what actually matters most to me, what's most important to me, and then being willing to let somebody else do it and have them do it at 50%, right? So if you did it, it would be 110%. You let someone else do it, it might not work, be quite as nice as if you did it. But you want to remind yourself what you're using that battery for instead, right? So again, there was a woman I was working with, her husband took the kids to school every day and he was late every day, right? And she was so upset about this. And I said, well, what happens if they show up late? And she's like, nothing. The school doesn't care. It's fine. I'm the one that's upset. And I'm like, well, why are you upset about it? She's like, because people think I'm a bad mom because my kids are showing up late. Right. And sure, absolutely, that judgment exists. She's not making that up. However, she also doesn't have to accept that. Right. She can absolutely say to people, yeah, my husband's in charge of taking the kids to school. You should definitely talk to him if you have issues with the kids being late. That's not my job. That's his job. He's a grown adult. Go talk to him about it. Right.
Yeah.
We don't have to accept that judgment, even if it's placed on us. And so, and be explicit about it, right? Be clear on who you're trying to be. We talk about this, about being value driven, about how you're trying to show up. My definition of a good mom is not the mom that does the most amount of laundry. And so my kid's in charge of his own laundry now. And sometimes I'm pretty sure he's wearing dirty clothes because he hasn't figured it out to get enough laundry done. That's not on me as a parent. That's not a bad mom because that's not my definition of a mom, is the person who does the most amount of laundry. And if other people want to judge me for that, it's totally fine because I'm clear on who I am and what matters to me and how I want to show up. And I'm pretty clear about it to other people too, right? I will say that's not my definition of a good mom. And so, yeah, sometimes we don't have clean laundry and I'm okay with that, right? Being explicit about who you're trying to be. And so, those are ways that we want to think about managing our battery and what's most important about it and how we communicate that to other people. And again, what we teach people about what's okay and not okay behavior, how we want to be treated as people, how women should show up in the workplace and at home, right? All of these little things accumulate to change that mindset and change that cultural way of dividing gender roles.
Yeah, I almost feel like as women, we should practice saying no to everything for even a week and what that would feel like. I remember, I was standing at a bus stop once dropping my daughter off, which I didn't normally do because I worked and had to go in early. And they were talking about something that was going on in our school. And I said, geez, I hadn't heard about that. And one of the other women turned around and said to me, well, if you were more involved in the school, and she was a stay-at-home mom, if you were more involved in the school and you would know what was going on. That made me so guilty that I was on the school board from, I think, grade 2 to grade 8 and was on the school board in grade 9 and grade 10 till finally I just and I didn't even like it, but it sent me doing something that I didn't like for year over year over year because I wanted to prove that I was involved. I could have just read the newsletters.
And I would bet, because I've done the same thing, right? I did the same thing of being the class parent or whatever. And I asked my kid, whether he cared I was the class parent or not, and he could not care less, and actually would have preferred I just came on one field trip with them, like for one day. Like that would have been more meaningful to him that if I'd shown up for a field trip than being the class parent for the whole year, right? So again, I do this thing, but it's actually not improving my relationship with my own kid, right? And again, people are going to judge no matter what happens, and so do what you think is right and get judged for that.
Yeah, and so many of us do these kind of things. Well, Dr. Dayna Lee-Baggley, as always, you are so insightful. I wish I had you on speed dial for some of the things that I see my clients going through and I've gone through, and so many women have experienced every single day, but especially the double duty that we pull as leaders, not only in our home life but in our work life as well, and trying to be all that and so much more. But thank you so very much for this insightful conversation and really just some simple wisdom that you brought to the table. So thanks again, and I look forward to talking about this at another point. We'll have you back again.
Thanks so much for having me.
We are at a crucial juncture in history, and our equality is not a nice to have. It is now beyond negotiation. This is our future, our fight.
This episode of Women on Wisdom is sponsored by TalentWise Collective, a global talent development company that curates solutions for your organization's needs and culture. Please note that the opinions and comments of the guests or hosts may not align with TalentWise Collective. If you are interested in having Sandra speak at an event, or wish to reach out for any other inquiries, you can connect through our email at connecttwc@talentwisecollective.com. That is, connecttwc@talentwisecollective.com. Thank you.